They always said Julian had his father's eyes sharp, steady, a little too serious for a boy his age. But when his father disappeared under the shadow of a financial scandal, no one looked into those eyes again the same way. At 15, Julian wasn't old enough to drive or vote, but he became the man of the house the moment a black SUV took his father away in the early hours of a cloudy Tuesday morning. The silence after the front door closed that day never really left. It settled in the walls. It curled inside his mother's wine bottles. It filled every corner of their once bright kitchen where laughter used to echo. Julian didn't scream. He didn't cry. He swept the kitchen floor, made sure his mother had something to eat that night, and rewrote the grocery list with coupons clipped neatly from the Sunday paper. He even picked up his father's jacket from the chair, where it still hung, and folded it with careful hands, like it might still carry answers. That night, he took a pen and wrote a letter, his first attempt to come out. He had planned it for weeks. He wrote about colors, music, and a boy named Marcus he didn't dare name. But as the moonlight touched the window pane, Julian struck a match and watched the paper curl into ashes. There was no room for truth here anymore. The days that followed felt like a slow fade into grayscale. His mother began sleeping until noon, eyes puffy and breath sour. She stopped going to church, stopped calling her friends. The only sound she made most days was the clinking of ice against a glass. Julian, in turn, learned to move through the house like a ghost, cooking meals, paying bills with the money his grandparents sent for birthdays, pretending things were fine, pretending he was fine. But what no one knew was that Julian was dying a little each day, not from pain, but from erasure. He wasn't grieving just the loss of a father. He was grieving the quiet death of his own voice, the slow suffocation of the boy who once dreamed in sketchbooks and whispered truths into pillowcases. Every morning he tucked himself into something smaller, something straighter, something safer, and no one noticed. No one asked. They called him strong, reliable, a good son. But Julian knew the truth. He was becoming invisible, even to himself. Still, he stayed. He stayed through the birthdays missed, the bills overdue, the nights when his mother called him by his father's name because she was too drunk to remember. He stayed because someone had to. He stayed because the idea of leaving felt like murder. What if the moment he walked out, the house collapsed? What if she never got up again? So Julian stitched the seams of their lives together with silence. He became the glue, the gravity, the unspoken promise that as long as he stayed, things might not fall apart completely. But what no one ever asked was, at what cost? And maybe that was the tragedy from the very beginning. Not that he had to grow up too soon, but that no one ever stopped to wonder what it was costing him to keep everyone else standing. Have you ever held everything together while quietly falling apart inside? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters because stories like Julian's aren't rare. They're just rarely seen. At 17, Julian was waking up before dawn and returning home after midnight, working back-to-back shifts at a local hardware store. His knuckles were raw from lifting boxes, his feet blistered inside worn-out shoes. He was no longer just the man of the house. He had become its provider, its fixer, its silent scaffolding. There was no more school dances, no art club, no sketchbooks. He had packed those things away with the letter he never sent and the name he never spoke. Julian knew how to survive. He smiled at customers, said yes ma'am and no sir, took overtime whenever it was offered. He became fluent in straightness, lowered his voice just enough, avoided eye contact with boys who looked like the ones he used to dream about, and dressed in a palette of navy, gray, and regret. His fashion sense, once vibrant, experimental, his own quiet language, was now replaced by oversized hoodies and faded jeans. He convinced himself it was comfort, but it was camouflage. He came home one evening with a paycheck in hand and passed by the living room where his mother lay unconscious on the couch, an empty bottle tipped over beside her. The TV played static. Her makeup was smudged, hair matted, skin pale under the flickering blue light. He stood there for a moment, watching the woman who once braided his hair for Halloween, who used to sing while watering her garden, who now hadn't called him by his name in weeks. Then he turned off the TV, covered her with a blanket, and sat alone in the dark kitchen eating cold spaghetti from the pot. He didn't feel like a son anymore. He felt like a caretaker, a shadow in his own life. The only light in Julian's world was Marcus, his best friend since freshman year. The only person who had ever looked at him and said the words, "I see you." When they would meet after work in the park near the edge of town, where they'd sit on the swings and talk in circles about dreams they knew they couldn't chase. Marcus was open about who he was, at least in whispers, and he made Julian feel like maybe, someday, the truth could be less dangerous. They held hands once, briefly, behind a row of oak trees. It was the first time in 2 years Julian felt warmth. But warmth, like most good things in Julian's life, didn't last. One night, Julian left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. His mother, in a moment of drunken boredom, scrolled through it looking for pictures. She found this: messages from Marcus, photos they took smiling. One that showed Marcus in Julian's hoodie. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply forwarded one photo to a familiar email address, his father's. The subject line was short: "He's just like you said." Julian never got the chance to explain. The next day, Marcus didn't show up to school. 2 weeks later, Julian found out he had transferred. No goodbye, no message, just silence. The kind that screamed louder than words. That night, Julian stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at himself for hours. Not because he didn't recognize the boy looking back, but because he did, and it terrified him. He saw everything he had buried: his softness, his longing, his truth. He washed his face, changed into his father's flannel shirt, and went to bed like nothing had happened. From that moment on, he stopped creating. He ripped out the pages of his old sketchbooks and burned them behind the house. He deleted his secret Instagram page. He threw away the cologne Marcus once gave him. If anyone had asked why, he would have said he was just decluttering. But no one asked. No one ever did. He was a model son now. Quiet, responsible, empty. And the emptier he became, the more praise he received. He's so grown up, so responsible, such a strong young man. They meant it as compliments. But to Julian, it felt like eulogies for a person who was never allowed to live. And yet, he stayed. Because in this house of broken windows and locked closets, survival looked a lot like disappearing. The day Julian's father came home, the air in the house shifted like a storm rolling in on still water. It had been 3 years since he left in disgrace, escorted through airport security under hushed gossip and judgmental stares. Now he returned not with an apology, but with a suitcase, a new haircut, and the same cold authority he left with. Julian was 19, taller now, lean from work and wear, quiet in the way that boys become when no one has truly listened to them in years. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unsure whether to say welcome home or why now. But before he could say either, his father wrapped him in a one-armed hug and whispered, "Looks like you finally manned up." That night at dinner, the house was too quiet. His father took his old seat at the head of the table as if nothing had changed. His mother put on lipstick for the first time in months. Julian sat in silence, eating the meal he had cooked, listening to his parents speak in fragments about getting things back on track. But when his father turned to him and asked, "Still drawing those little fashion things? Or have you outgrown that phase?" The air left Julian's lungs. He shook his head. "Not anymore." "Good," his father replied like a verdict. "That stuff was never meant for men." That night, Julian lay awake in bed, fingers twitching with designs he no longer allowed himself to draw. He tried to picture a future where he wasn't bound by this house, these people, this legacy of shame disguised as tradition. But the door was always closed, the room always dark. Over the next few months, his father reclaimed the house like reclaiming lost territory. The gym equipment came back into the garage. The family computer was password locked. Julian's every move seemed to be under silent surveillance. His mother praised her husband's discipline, relieved to be told what to do again. She started drinking less, but talking even less too. One Saturday afternoon, Julian was helping unload groceries when his father noticed the rainbow keychain clipped to his backpack, a small, frayed token from a pride event Julian had never dared attend, but once dreamed of. "What's this?" his father asked, holding it between his fingers like it was dirty. Julian hesitated. "Just something I picked up." His father stared at him for a long, hollow second. Then he dropped the keychain into the trash and said, "Not under this roof." That moment cracked something open inside Julian. Not just because of the keychain, not even because of the insult, but because the look on his mother's face, blank, eyes down, unmoving, confirmed what he feared most. There would be no one here to defend him. Not even now, not even after everything. The next day, Julian found an envelope addressed to him on his bed. Inside was a brochure for a military-style college his father had circled in red ink, with a note. If you're serious about becoming a man, this is the first step. Julian laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. After years of carrying this house, of sacrificing dreams, of burying his truth so deeply it began to rot, the reward was exile into someone else's version of masculinity. Later that week, Julian found a quiet corner of the public library and opened a new sketchbook for the first time in 3 years. His hands shook. The lines were uneven, but it felt like breathing after holding it in too long. He drew until his wrist ached, not for anyone else, just to remember what it felt like to exist. Then he drew something new, a doorway, open, light spilling out. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel trapped. He felt ready. It happened in silence, as most final decisions do. No slammed doors, no shouts across the hall. Just Julian, 21 now, standing in the middle of his childhood room with a half-zipped duffel bag and a pair of eyes that had stopped asking for understanding a long time ago. He had spent the past few months collecting the pieces of himself in secret, late-night sketching at the library. Freelance gigs designing graphics for local queer artists, and hours studying for a scholarship that didn't require parental signatures. Every act of rebellion was quiet but intentional, each one a thread pulling him away from the house that had swallowed his name and voice for years. The breaking point came not with violence, but with a family dinner. A distant cousin had posted a photo of Julian on social media smiling, holding hands with another boy during a local art exhibition. The photo didn't go viral, but it traveled fast enough to reach the walls of his living room. The caption read, "When truth is beautiful, it doesn't need permission." His father found it first. Julian knew from the way the air froze when he walked in. His mother didn't look up from her wine. The screen glowed behind them on the coffee table, his smile magnified and exposed, sitting in a pool of shame. "You need to decide," his father said without turning, "who you are or who you belong to." Julian didn't speak. He looked at the photo and felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. "I've already decided," he said, voice steady. "You just never wanted to hear it." The next morning, his things were on the porch, neatly packed, no drama. Just like his father had always taught him. Clean exits, no mess. Beside his bag was a folded note. "We won't stand in your way, but we won't watch you ruin yourself either." His mother didn't say goodbye, but Julian didn't cry. Instead, he left behind a copy of his first accepted portfolio, 6 full-color pages of designs inspired by the house he grew up in. The collection was titled Wounds and Walls, each piece a metaphor, each stitch a memory. On the final page, he had written in pencil, "Not everything that looks like home is safe." He took the bus to the city with $50, 2 changes of clothes, and a folded letter of admission to a design program that had seen his talent, not his silence. The first night in the city, he slept on the floor of a friend's studio. It was cramped, noisy, unfamiliar, but for the first time in years, Julian breathed without shrinking. He wore his own clothes again, soft fabrics, bold colors. He laughed without lowering his voice. He told people his real name without watching their eyes. He still missed his mother's humming and the way his father used to cook eggs on Sundays. But he didn't miss the ache of being invisible. Each day, he stitched his life back together, not from scraps of survival, but from choices he finally owned. He worked 2 jobs, studied at night, and submitted designs under his name. Julian West. Not a shadow, not a sun pretending, just him. One afternoon, he received an envelope in the mail. It was from the Design Scholarship Committee. Inside was a letter he had not only been awarded full funding, but his portfolio would be featured in a national LGBTQ+ arts showcase, the same collection he had left on the kitchen table. And at the bottom of the envelope was a sticky note, unsigned. "Your truth is louder than our silence. Don't come home. Just go forward." He didn't know who sent it. He didn't care. It was the first time words felt like love instead of leverage. It started with a whisper, just a quiet mention in a local queer arts magazine about a rising star who stitched silence into style. But within a year, Julian West's name was on every screen that had once ignored him. His collection, Wounds and Walls, had made it to a national showcase during Pride Month, praised not just for its design, but for its message, that the home we escape can become the fabric of the freedom we wear. The runway was nothing like the rooms Julian used to survive in. It was light, open, unapologetic. Models walked draped in designs made from upholstery fabric, curtain fringe, even patched together shirts like the ones his father used to wear. Each piece told a story, a childhood, a silence, a scream beneath wallpaper. The final model stepped out in a suit made from translucent mesh, with the words embroidered across the back in red thread. He was the glue, and no one asked if it hurt. The photo of that moment went viral overnight. But the real twist came 2 weeks later, when a recording surfaced online in an anonymous submission to the showcase's press team. In it, Julian's father's voice rang clear. That stuff was never meant for men. It was followed by a woman's voice, his mother saying softly but bitterly, "He pretends to be strong, but that boy is going to break us apart." The clip ended with a timestamp, 4 months before Julian moved out. No one knew who leaked it, but it didn't matter. People didn't just wear his designs now. They stood for what he had survived. For every LGBTQ+ kid forced to act, sound, dress, and breathe like someone else. For every queer child who carried the weight of a family's shame, only to be called selfish when they tried to set it down. Julian didn't go on talk shows. He didn't trash his family online. He didn't need to, because truth, when worn boldly, speaks louder than revenge ever could. He opened his own studio, not far from the apartment where he first slept on the floor. He hired young queer artists, especially those with nowhere else to go. On the wall near his desk, he framed the letter he left behind on his family's table. Below it, in gold lettering, he added a new line. "If they didn't see your worth at home, build a world where they can't look away." He never heard from his parents again, but sometimes silence is just another kind of closure. And for the first time in his life, Julian didn't feel like a ghost. He felt seen, not as a son, not as a survivor, not as someone holding everyone together, but simply, completely as himself. Have you ever turned pain into something the world couldn't ignore? Share your moment below. Someone out there might need your strength right now. If Julian's story moved you, comment and share it with someone who's still learning how to choose themselves. Because being who you are is never too much and never too late.